Welcome to the Parent Matters podcast, where we help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of parenting and equip you with tools to confidently parent your children. I'm Susan Stutzman, and today we're continuing our series on childhood ADHD. For the last 2 weeks, we've talked about supporting a child with ADHD diagnosis to cultivate healthy relationships at home and at school. And today, we'll be talking specifically to caregivers about supporting your child for successful social engagement. And to help me do that, I want to welcome back Jon Caes, a child therapist here at Kid Matters. Welcome, Jon.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be back, and it's a great opportunity to dive deeper into some of these issues that impact, in a very meaningful way, kids with ADHD.
Yeah.
Often we hear about those, basic characteristics of these kids, but what do you do with them? And, going a little deeper into some of these important areas is important.
Yes. So thank you so much for lending your time. I know everyone listening to this is going to glean some really great nuggets from today. And we're going to talk about supporting a child with ADHD. But first, I want to say, I know for many parents, there can be quite an intensity that their children bring to social settings, especially kiddos with ADHD. So I'm curious if, before we jump into how to support your ADHD diagnosed child for successful social engagement, if we can talk a bit about the parents' feelings and possible concern about the amount of energy or if I can say muchness, their child may bring to a relationship, and how to think through inhibiting impulses and the impact those impulses may have on other children in social settings.
Yeah, you're referencing something that comes hard to our kids with ADHD, and that is that they might engage in silly or impulsive behaviors that are stigmatizing, frankly.
Yeah.
And this can be off-putting both to the peers and the parents of those kids who might be supervising that play encounter. And you worry as a parent, like, do they, show enough positive interaction and friendship that maybe they might not be invited back, or you're worried about your child standing in the social world. You want them to be successful.
Yeah, that's so true. And it can really rub relationships into a tension, especially with adults, right? And so as we talk about these social engagement and the challenges and how, as a parent or a caregiver, to support children to be successful, especially when they are dealing with different ADHD symptoms. Can you just, as we're going along, maybe touch on not only ways that parents can support the children, but also support themselves? Because I know this can be a real deeply felt and potentially ostracizing part of the ADHD diagnosis for a child and family.
Right. Parents often blame themselves, of course, and that's going to do nothing good for anyone. It's not your fault, and it's something that this child is going to work it out, and they're going to be successful. But we have to take a breath as a parent and realize it is really hard, and sometimes we're really unhappy with the way things are going and the amount of stress we have. But don't feel guilty. Don't feel like it's your responsibility, like you're doing something wrong. You need support. You need to have at least a couple people that you can confide in and share openly your feelings of discouragement at times, and they can give you some feedback. Hopefully it'll be positive.
Yeah. And I remember in our first podcast when we talked about parenting and caregiving with the ADHD child a little bit as well, you mentioned a resource, Chad.
Yes.
That has actually put together, like you can put in your zip code and find support groups for
Absolutely.
parents.
Yeah.
Because again, right, like your kiddo may not, you may not have a large amount of ADHD kids in the same grade or in your social circle, but that doesn't mean that you can't find resources or support groups to help.
And the good thing about that organization is it's not just support, but there's also some education and learning about what might work or not work.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, Jon, let's jump into our topic today, supporting your child for successful social engagement. What are the things you want parents and caregivers to know?
Yeah, thank you. We're going to walk through a few things today, and the first thing I want to talk about is topic maintenance.
Okay, can you describe what that means? I know both the words, but together, help me understand
Absolutely.
what you're trying to get at.
So a conversation is two people or more building blocks that are coherent and connected to each other.
Okay.
And they work off of each other.
So like, hi, how are you?
Exactly. My name is so-and-so. How are you today?
What is your name? And then we
Right.
go back and forth. So it's almost
Right.
like a banter.
Right. Our kids sometimes might have some random thought in their head, and they're impulsive, and they might notice something that's not even a part of the conversation we're having, and they might interject that. A lot of times they're repetitive, silly phrases even, and that once or twice is okay, but then the peer might look at them and say, like, come on, like, why do you keep doing that? It's so annoying.
Okay, so because thank you for clarifying that too, because sometimes I have a thought or something pops up, it's like, it's not like, look, there's a bird, but it's almost kind of like,
Right.
like my kid is running away, or maybe there's a car, so like but I can come back to the topic at hand and maintain or come
Right.
back into it. So you're talking about being able to carry on a conversation almost without too much distractibility, or if they do get distracted, to actually come back.
Yes. Yeah. So being able to filter the thoughts a little bit and say, does this belong in the conversation or not? Mm-hmm. And then making that decision correctly.
Okay.
And then also being attuned enough to the other person that and of course this is developmentally different for, different age groups.
Sure.
But ultimately, as we get older with the kids with ADHD, the capacity to be attuned enough to realize, what kind of comments are deepening the dialogue between the two people, mm-hmm. and ones that also are helpful and supportive and connective to the other person, based on being aware of what's going on with that person and between those people.
And so you're talking about developmentally appropriate abilities, not necessarily that they're going to be at a 12-year-old level when they're 6.
Absolutely.
Right? They might not be able to carry on an extended conversation, but they are able to carry on a conversation, maybe that's a minute or two, with eye contact, with being able to maintain what is going on.
Right.
Okay.
And you bring up eye contact, and of course that is the hallmark of feeling like someone's listening to you.
Yes.
A lot of our kids cannot maintain the eye contact.
I know. Even on this podcast, like, we have microphones set next to each other. For listeners that aren't watching us, there's like, we've had to actually contort the microphone so we can see each other, because we're having a conversation versus just sitting and looking mm-hmm. and being distracted.
Right.
And that's really important.
Right. And kids, I'm talking about developmentally from a very early age, can sense, by the absence or by the presence of that eye contact, how much connection is occurring.
Sure, yeah. What is one thing that you specifically would say that parents could do to cultivate topic maintenance?
In the family, you can begin at a very early age having simple conversations that are directed towards the interests of your kids, and help them realize what fits and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And say, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear about the circus when we were talking about our trip to downtown today. Or,
Yeah. It's not a shaming statement. It's just, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear that. And then helping them in a playful way say, I wonder if what would go, with our conversation, would talking about what to do on the car ride, or thinking about the circus, or,
Right.
Getting a drink of water right now, which one would be maybe the next thing that we talk about in this conversation.
Right. And another thing I've done with some kids is a little activity where we have a bucket of blocks, and we start by, I'll introduce a topic to a 7-year-old boy. Did you see the baseball game yesterday? Put the block down.
Okay.
And then they have to respond on topic. If they do respond on topic, they get to put a block on top of my block.
Ooh, okay.
And then I respond. If I'm on topic, I get to put it on top of their block.
Mm-hmm.
So we build about watching the baseball game. Now, it's okay to change topics, but we both have to agree to change the topic.
Okay.
It's not just unexpected, off-putting. Like,
and
whoa.
and then just follow that through a little bit for me. So if let's say I started talking about the circus, and we had been building like 5 blocks up about the baseball game, what would happen with those blocks?
Well, we would leave them on the table, and then when we're ready to move on, we could build another.
But if I just interjected about the circus, I don't get to place a block, or I.
If you interject, then we have to start another
pile.
Pile.
Okay. But the goal is to get it.
Yeah. See, let's see how many interchanges we can create.
Cool. That's a great way to teach topic maintenance. So I know you also were going to talk to us a little bit about social awareness and perspective taking. When I think of this, I think of this big concept called theory of mind. Being able to actually put oneself in another person's shoes, or to think, if there's a box of Band-Aids there, that there could be something else in that box versus the Band-Aids, right?
Right.
And so can you just talk a little bit about why this is important, and why kids with ADHD often struggle with social awareness, and how to cultivate that?
Yeah. Well, so as adults, we know that to the extent that you can understand me and that I feel understood, I will have a much more positive connection and desire to want to see you again.
Yeah.
And more, right?
Sure, yes.
So if we take that idea, the more that we can understand another person, that we can ask questions like, so we might want to teach our kids to think, like, well, what does Jimmy like to do? What are his interests? What questions could you ask him about that to have him talk about his interests? So exploring that area is going to be a rich source of deepening the conversation and having the other person feel understood and seen for my interests and preferences.
I just had this image when you were talking about parents sitting with their children and helping them through this encounter, through these social times. And oftentimes I think as parents, perhaps we might think, a play date is going to be less of us being involved, and they're going to figure it out. But I think it's important to just note that whether your child has ADHD or not, it's helpful to model how to do this appropriately. And sometimes that looks like sitting on the floor and practicing with another child, or practicing with your child, just like you said with the blocks.
Right. And it doesn't have to be like in a strenuous, like, now we're going to learn this. It can be in a fun, engaged way. And you might find that this also builds your relationship with your child.
Yeah. Like Legos, for instance, right? Like, if my kiddo has ADHD and I don't have Legos, but his friend Jimmy loves Legos, right? If I got even a little set of Legos, or I got a book at the library about Legos, then we could actually have something to offer if we were having a back and forth conversation in our topic maintenance. Right. And
then
that would lead into being socially aware. Like, he's talking about Legos.
Right.
So and I know something about Legos. He probably wants to talk about this. Maybe I can then say, let's play Legos.
That's right.
Or show me your Legos.
Right. And also, again, helps the child be more attuned when they're thinking about, like, what are the other person's interests, and if you're learning about them, like you suggested, getting a book, then they're like, oh, I get that where this is going. There's a purpose to this, and it's very building.
Yeah, because that is how we build relationships, right? Like, if I'm not good, if I don't love something, or I'm not totally interested in something, but I really enjoy being with another person, I often will then try to read up or understand more about a topic that is important to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah, and then as your child inevitably makes mistakes, and brings up topics that are off or can't sustain the dialogue, you can help them be aware of that. That's difficult for them too.
Yeah. And I will say one thing that, as you're saying this, that I find really helpful with parents and kids, through helping them with this social component, is to pick a time maybe to practice this, not do it all the time, or just, at random times, because that can add to tension in the parent-child dynamic. If you're always correcting, or you're saying, where did that go off course, right? Just like if I was always having a confrontational conversation with a friend, right? And never just having fun, or never just allowing them to be silly or say something 10 times, right? But actually having a specific time to work on some of these things.
Yeah, having some boundaries around it. And reading your child too. Is this a pleasant experience for them? Sometimes the child is naturally curious and is like fine with it.
Yeah.
But other kids, they're more rigid, and it's a little more difficult for them to receive any feedback.
Yeah. And so knowing your child, that's helpful. Is there anything else that you think would be helpful for caregivers who are supporting their children in really making this social engagement and friendships work that we should know?
Yeah. So obviously we've been talking about social skills sort of working within the family and building those, but then working on social skills just for use with the other child. And then another kind of social skills is self-regulation skills.
Oh, yeah.
So,
because yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So just to...
I was trying to put my block on before you were done with your block.
We all do that, don't we? We all have to kind of be aware.
I was like, I got it. I understand. Okay, so keep going.
Most people are, to your point, most people are always thinking about what they're going to say next rather than truly listening to the other person.
Oh my goodness, case in point.
Some of us are more... better adept at kind of hiding that and, coming off in a socially competent manner. But it's kind of the human nature.
Yeah, I grew up in a family with so many children, and it was kind of like whoever talks the loudest, gets heard. And so it almost it's not that it was an ADHD environment at all, but I feel like sometimes, oh my goodness, I see that trait in myself. I can socially pull back and see different things. And I don't, as far as I know, have ADHD, but I will say that I struggle with, I'm so excited to share something that I often butt in.
Right. And we all do that. That's normal.
Thank you for normalizing who I am. But can you talk a little bit more about then self-regulation skills?
Because Oh, before we get to the self-regulation, we had been talking about social skills, and one more thing about that before we get to the self-regulation would be, developing little scripts to help your child be successful. When we talked about introducing each other, have some ready-made phrases. Maybe you've talked about the fact that they like Legos, and, don't forget to ask about their Legos. Make sure that you're taking turns, making sure that you're sharing the time. If you're going to choose a game, make sure that they also choose a game, so having some little rules and scripts to go along to make those encounters more successful.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I think, too, depending on the age of the kiddo, helping them to kind of think through what are some things that we can remember, and maybe having it in their pocket so they can kind of reference it if they are feeling stuck, or if they're like, Jimmy was only wanting to play this game and he's not listening to me, and I've been listening to him, and, different things. Different scripts, right?
That could be frustrating, right?
It can be really frustrating.
And that leads us right into the self-regulation.
Awesome.
So with self-regulation, a lot of times our kids, as we said, they're impulsive.
Yeah, I think of self-regulation as like I want to say something, and I'm dancing around like, come on, see me. I'm ready to ask my question, but I'm moving my hands and I'm not asking my question, right? Like, even though that might be distracting, I'm regulating myself to hold it in while I'm waiting my turn.
Right.
Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something else?
Well, I'm talking about that, but also more importantly, I think, is sometimes, losing control to the point where I'm so upset with something that I lash out, or, I'm not going to play, because I'm frustrated. Again, our kids, not all, I don't want to categorically say this, but sometimes our kids struggle, with disappointment and may lash out, or shut down, and sometimes not manage well their frustration.
Yeah.
And so they need some assistance with self-regulation skills.
Sure.
So obviously the first step with that would be, to be able to recognize how they're feeling.
Yeah.
Because if they're not aware that their tension is increasing, that they're getting more upset, then there's nothing that they can do if they're not aware.
Sure.
Being able to take a break, to say, hey, I need to get a drink of water, or maybe I can go use the bathroom, or...
It's hard, I think, at times to think of everything to do to regulate. And so one of the things that I like to do, especially when teaching this with kiddos, is to arm parents and children with multiple ways to regulate, and so they can practice and find the ones that work best for them, so that they have them in their pocket, right? So like taking a break, taking a drink of water, taking a deep breath, right? Those are ones that I do, but that might not be what a child needs, right? Like a child may need jump up and down 10 times, twirl around 7 times, punch the air 2 times or 20 times or whatever. I know like there are a lot of different resources out there for parents that can teach wiggle activities or brain breaks, or, there's lots of different words for this, right? And so it can be really helpful if we arm our parents with ways, parents and caregivers, with ways in which to cultivate this at home, so that it's not, you only do this in social settings. But no, we do this all the time, or we practice it even when we're not at our wit's end, or when we don't need to regulate, right? So these are things that help us feel better. And regulation really is getting a child back into balance, because it's like they're too expended, or they're just too far gone. So we want them to feel balanced. We don't want them to not feel the feeling, right? But they want to be able to get back in and socially engage.
Yeah, and as you point out, these are skills that can be used in multiple environments, and are especially helpful in a peer interaction.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I just want to stop here just for a second and just say that the topics discussed on this podcast should be considered a matter of personal opinion. They don't reflect professional advice. If you or your child is in need of mental health counseling support, please search out a licensed counselor, because this podcast is not mental health counseling. We're mental health counselors, but for the sake of what we're doing, we're having a conversation, a banter back and forth, if you will.
Yeah, and these are some general ideas. We don't know
right.
your child.
That's right. We do not know your child, but we do have a lot of great resources. We have a page on our website on ADHD of different things, resources and ways to spot ADHD. And sometimes it can be hard to connect with your child. And so I want to take a sponsor break and just say that many parents and caregivers who struggle to feel connected to their children because of busyness and work often forget to take time to connect with their kiddos. Did you like that little pause there, Jon?
Yeah.
Take time. That's why we've put together a free 5-day parent challenge where I, Susan Stutzman, will send you 5 emails with each day with high impact, easy to do activity so that you can do 5 minutes of meaningful connection with your kiddo for 5 days in a row. If you want to take this challenge, go to kidmatterscounseling.com/challenge. And find some new ways to have big smiles, laughter, and connection. Again, that web address is kidmatterscounseling.com/challenge. And we wish you many moments of meaningful connection with your kiddos. Jon, we've talked about a lot today. What is one thing over these past 3 weeks that you think that if parents take nothing else with them that you would want them to remember and to hold on to with their children and dealing with ADHD?
Well, that you have a wonderful child and they have many strengths, and ADHD is just a part of some of the way they exhibit their energy, and you can expect them to grow into wonderful people, and I hope you've learned a few things that might help you along the way to make that happen sooner than later.
Yeah. And if you're needing any support, please don't hesitate to reach out directly to Jon. You can find his information, get in touch with him at kidmatterscounseling.com, look at the therapist, and his email and extension are there. Also, the resources that you mentioned are in the links in these show notes for today. But thank you, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. And I am happy to answer any other questions.
Awesome. Well, all right, folks, thanks for listening. If you found this conversation useful, please don't hesitate to subscribe to this podcast and join me again next time for the Parent Matters podcast. And remember, don't parent alone.